Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Powerhouse Museum. My name's Catherine Poltz. I'm the programmer for the Sydney Science Festival. The Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences acknowledges Australia's First Nations people as the traditional owners and custodians of this land and gives respect to elders past and present, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This is the 5th year of the Sydney Science Festival, and we're excited to bring our audiences 13 days of science talks, tours, exhibitions, and activities, with over 160 events happening throughout Sydney during National Science Week. This year, our focus is on how science informs and intersects with the everyday issues. To us, science is a creative tool that we use to shape and understand our present and future worlds, and with the festival, we create space to debate, discuss, and discover the science issues we care about, from climate change and oceanic pollution to the future of health and space exploration and astronomy tonight. The festival is produced by the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, and we're supported by many organizations who make the festival possible. I'd like to acknowledge our founding partner, Inspiring Australia, our event partner, the Australian Museum, our principal partner, Western Sydney University, and our supporting partner, ResMed. We're excited tonight to bring you 4 influential and inspirational experts leading Australia's diverse space programs. Since the Australian Space Agency was first announced in 2017, it has captured the hopes and ambitions of the Australian public and scientists alike. Our collective excitement over space feels like it's at a record high with the historic 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing last month, and many exciting conversations happening around the future of Mars, returning to the moon, and importantly, how new technologies designed for space are benefiting and improving our lives back on Earth. Our panel tonight will unpack Australia's cutting-edge science and research and will take us through what challenges and opportunities lie ahead. This event is also part of our programming around our recently opened Apollo 11 exhibition above us on level 2, and tonight we have the pleasure of being under Luke Jerram's artwork, The Museum of the Moon. Without further ado, I'll now introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Lisa Harvey Smith. Professor Lisa Harvey Smith is an award-winning astrophysicist and the Australian government's Women in STEM Ambassador, a role based at the University of New South Wales. She was previously the project scientist for the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder Radio Telescope at CSIRO. Her research investigates the birth and death of stars, colliding galaxies, and cosmic magnetic fields. Lisa is the author of When Galaxies Collide and a presenter of ABC's television program, Stargazing Live. Her new children's book, Under the Stars, Astrophysics for Bedtime, launches in October. Please join me in welcoming Lisa.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks all for being here. Who's come back from work? Directly from work. Well done. Who's come directly from school or learning, education? Yes. Who was just having a great day without those things? Fantastic. All of those things are valid. Well done. Thanks for being here. It's great to welcome an amazing panel of experts about space. Who's got any apparel from the Australian Space Agency? I can see a hat here. Well done, sir. Well done. Any T-shirts? Can anyone raise me a T-shirt? You know you can get yes, there's one over there. Well done. You can get Australian Space Agency stuff at the QuestCon shop. Let's support our space agency. Who was aware before, just now, that there is an Australian Space Agency? Who's aware of that? Yeah, that's great. It's good that the story's getting out there because it's been just over a year now. And it's fantastic that we can now start to understand and have these discussions through National Science Week, through Sydney Science Festival, under this beautiful moon, wonderful moon. We can all sit and learn from 3 of the foremost space experts in this country and internationally from this country. So we do have a new space agency. We want to learn things about what it is, why now, why does it exist now, what's it for, when are we going to Mars, are we going to take kangaroos to Mars? I want you to leave with that image, if nothing else. So I'd like to introduce our expert panel tonight. First, next to me here is Aude Vignelles. She is an Executive Director of Program and Capability at the Australian Space Agency. She leads our space technology roadmap. She's a space and aeronautics engineer with 25 years of experience in delivering large and complex programs in various different industries, telecommunications, space, and media. Very impressive CV. She started her career at the European Space Agency in the Netherlands, so no big deal there. That's pretty awesome. Andrea Boyd, in the blue, she's a flight controller at the International Space Station. I want to repeat that. She's a flight controller for the International Space Station. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that incredible and inspirational? I'm so excited. Andrea works for the European Space Agency as well and is stationed at the European Astronaut Centre. Where do you work? European Astronaut Centre. And she's a mechatronic engineer. We'll be asking you what that means. She graduated from the University of Adelaide, is a South Australian, proudly, and worked for many years as an automation engineer and a mining control system specialist. So that's very interesting. She joined the International Space Station Flight Control Team 7 years ago, certified as a flight operations engineer and for payload control, and qualified in later years for crew operations and biomedical. So she talks to the astronauts as well and does lots of very important stuff to do with the experiments on board. So we're going to talk to you about that in just a little bit. Now, over at the end there is friend and former colleague, Dr. Sarah Pearce from the CSIRO, Astronomy and Space Science Division. She's Deputy Director there. So she leads CSIRO's involvement in the International Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope, the best telescope. And she is Australia's chief science negotiator for the international treaty that governs that amazing new telescope that's being built in Western Australia and in South Africa. She's got a PhD in astrophysics, again, no big deal. She leads CSIRO's space research program, including the Centre for Earth Observation, which coordinates activities looking at the Earth from space. That's what that's about. And she manages CSIRO's share of the new Novastar satellite. So that's another interesting piece of space knowledge. Prior to joining CSIRO, she managed the Grid PP computer grid for particle physics in the UK as part of the CERN constellation, the particle collider in Europe, and she was a science advisor to the UK Parliament. So, very impressive expertise here. Please welcome our panel. Now, you've all got amazing experience and amazing CVs, but I want to go back to here, the heart, because I love that. Why people are interested, and I'm fascinated to know why you first got interested in space, what sparked your interest in space, engineering, technology, astrophysics, whatever it was. Was there something as a child that you remember, or was there a long and winding journey into this career? Maybe I'll start with you, Aude.
There's lots of things. First one is curiosity. I remember I must have been 7 or 8, and there was this radio talking, and surely there must have been wee people in the radio. So I opened the radio, and I was very disappointed that there was no one in there. And then I got in trouble because I couldn't put it back. So there was that. Then there was the fact that curiosity going further and further. I mean, we've mastered the ground, we've mastered the sea, we've mastered the air, and it was logical that we should master space and go further and further. And every time you look at the sky at night, you always wonder, where does it stop? Is there life out there? It was that curiosity that was the first thing. And then I was lucky enough to attend the first launch of Ariane. And actually, the ancestors of Ariane Europa were tested here in Woomera up to 1970. So it's coming back in big circle. And attending a launch that was in 79, it's going to be the 40th birthday of the first launch of Ariane this year as well. Attending a launch, seeing this big thing going up, and the sound it makes, it's vibrating in your belly. That really caught me for forever. And seeing all different national people, so it was 12 European nations working on one goal to get that thing up with no politics involved, so true collaboration. That was very inspiring as well. So yeah, after that, you're hooked for life and you have to work in space.
Magic. How about you, Andrea?
So I think for me, my parents were responsible for rural health of South Australia, and we rotated around everywhere. So you just had the most spectacular views of the whole Milky Way and Southern Hemisphere night sky. I miss that in Europe. And so I just, wondered about it and wondered, what could you do that's sort of more out there? And Star Trek Voyager came out when I was about 10, and I learnt the word engineer watching them work on everything. And I'm like, right, the engineers make stuff work in space. So if I become an engineer, I can do that. That was my trajectory afterwards, and it did get me there.
So often I hear those stories, people weren't necessarily swayed by a teacher or a parent. It was something on TV, and it's certainly the case for a lot of people. We've got to get more, if there's people who work in TV, get more engineers on TV, and certainly more female engineers on TV. How about you, Sarah? What sparked your interest in astrophysics and space?
Yeah, look, I was always interested in, I guess, what you might think of the big questions. Where did we come from? What was the Big Bang? What are we made of? But what
so you were an annoying child, were you?
Philosophical is the way I would put it, Lisa. But what really, I think, made me decide that space was for me was when I was 17, I was really lucky. I went to the first space school in the UK. And in fact, so we celebrated the 30th anniversary of that space school this year. And people who went to that with me are now in leading roles all around the world. In fact, the woman who leads space at ANU, she was at that space school with me when I was 17. And it was really there that I met kind of my tribe, I guess. Other people who liked space, from having been the kind of a lone voice at my school who liked this. And then the year after that, I was lucky to be selected to be a UK rep to the International Space Camp. So this was, again, the first year that they'd run this. And so I went to Huntsville, Alabama, and spent a week pretending to be an astronaut. And honestly, if I look back, I'm married, I've had children, but it's probably still the best week of my life.
I won't tell you. Well, that's fascinating, because we've known each other for a number of years, but I don't think we talked about space school, because I went to a UK space school as well, and I met a lot of my lifelong friends who are now astronomers, top astronomers around the world. It's amazing what these experiences can give you. So if you
I went to the South Australian Space School, and one of my classmates is in the audience tonight.
There you go. Who's this? Who's this? Who's the other space schoolite?
No, that's International Space University. I went to that as well.
Yep, there we go. It's all of that. So we have these types of things in Australia too. So young people can go and they can really immerse themselves in these experiences, which are sometimes transformative experiences outside of school, which is wonderful. Oh, that's really great to hear. All different avenues, but very important ones. And astronomy and space really capture the public's imagination. As we can see here, we've got a room full of people missing their dinner. So why do you think there is such interest in these fields, and particularly now? Why would you say that this is? Why is it such an easy sell?
Again, I think space is the curiosity we have. It's looking at the sky. It's wanted to know what's out there. Everything I said before. It's something that I was discussing that with one of my sons. He said, "But space is just super cool," and that's the answer I'm gonna give.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that. It's just super cool.
Absolutely. So there's been a long time when Australia has been involved in space. We know through many different forms of pop culture and information recently about our role as a nation in the Apollo moon landings, for example. There was a satellite launch by Australia in the 70s. We've only just got a space agency. So why? Why now? Why has that happened?
I think now is a good time, and so I've been here for 20 years, 19 years being frustrated because we didn't have a space agency, and I think this country has everything it takes to have a good space agency. But there were a lot of things that were probably not the priority for Australia, small country, not a lot of money to invest in there. There was, the old space, big government project with big funding. Now is the new space, so the funding is coming from private sector. You have what we call Space 2.0. You can do satellite with the component of your phone. You can find components off the shelves. Space is accessible, is more affordable, so everybody can play, and we can play too. We have a lot of very clever people here in Australia, and now we can play that as well. So there is all this vibrant community of startup and SMEs who are doing really cool things. And I remember it's maybe 5 years ago when I met you, I realized that I was not alone to be frustrated, and I found my crowd, as you said before. I felt that there was everywhere in Australia, every state, every territory, there was someone in the school, someone in a company, someone in a government that really felt that there was something to be done there. And as you said, Australia has been doing stuff in space for the last 50 years, and I've always been doing stuff in space. It's not because anniversary of 50 years is gone, CSIRO kept doing things in space, tracking Voyager, still doing extraordinary things every single day. We are calibrating Earth observation satellites in space because we have sensors here on our ground and in our seas, and we are doing that every day as well for multitude of satellites. We're doing lots of things. 2010 was the sample returned from a comet from the Japanese. It landed here in South Australia. There's going to be another one coming next year. We don't brag a lot about everything we've done in space, but there is a lot of activity in space. So in 2017, the government decided to commission a group and say, you go out there and you tell me what's happening with the space industry in Australia. Is there a story to tell there? And it was held by Megan Clark, Dr. Megan Clark, who is now the head of the Space Agency. And they came back with 4 recommendations. We need a policy. We need a national strategy in space. We need to coordinate all these efforts that we're doing everywhere because there is really a lot of things happening. We need to support the industry, and we need to have a single door for everybody outside of Australia or inside of Australia to knock on when they want to do stuff in space. And the government read that, and they were convinced. They didn't give quite the budget we were asking in that report, but the 1st of July 2018, and the agency was created, and the support from the community is still extraordinary a year later. I think we had more than 110 million click on LinkedIn or Twitter. So you're coming and you're coming back, liking and commenting. So, and it's been a year, and I dare say I think we've done a good job. We didn't rush into things. We didn't say, oh, let's do stuff everywhere. And we thought, we created the organization. We are only 23. We've done a lot with only 23 people. I used to say, first time I work in the government, I never worked as much in my life, but we're passionate about what we're doing. And we've put a strategy out there. And this strategy explains 7 sectors where we believe Australia is good, and that's where we're going to work, and that's where we're going to do program, because we have selected these 7 sectors by listening to the country, and that's where we're gonna grow, because we're good in these sectors, we have niche skills, and it's just the beginning.
So there are lots and lots of things that Australia's engaging with. I wanted to ask Sarah, actually, what are some of the things that, from your perspective in CSIRO, that CSIRO is engaging with in the space sector? So what part are you playing?
Yeah, so as Aude mentioned, we've been working with international space agencies and in particular with NASA for 60 years now. So from the very 1962 was the first time that we helped NASA track a spacecraft, the Parkes telescope and the telescope outside Canberra, Honeysuckle Creek. Tracked Apollo 11, which I hope everybody in the audience knows by now, because it's been all over the news and things for the last few weeks. But we've also been doing that, ever since then. So one of my abiding memories is sitting at work, watching the 7 minutes of terror when the Curiosity rover landed on Mars. You remember, NASA had this enormously ambitious program to land, and a very, very complicated and extremely risky approach. And the data from that was coming through our Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex. So we were the prime station for that. And so it was with enormous pride and not a great deal of relief that it was great to see Curiosity land, and that Australia had played its part in receiving that data. So, when New Horizons flew past Pluto, we were the prime station. When Cassini had its last moments and fell into Saturn, and I shed a tear, as I hope some of the people did too. The data from that also came through Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex. We've got a long history of working with internationally with organizations like NASA, with the European Space Agency, with JAXA, the Japanese, as Aude mentioned.
So what about Earth observation? So that's looking up, and it's being the eyes and ears for those space missions, which are very far away on other planets, and listening to gathering together the data that they're sending and the pictures back to Earth. So what about looking down at Earth? So that's the Earth observation part of it.
Yeah, CSIRO's got around 80 people who work in the Earth observation area across all different parts of the organisation, looking at oceans, looking at atmospheres, looking at agriculture. But the thing that we've been missing for a long time is Australia doesn't have any of its own Earth observation satellites. So what we've done is we have bought 10% of a UK satellite. So it's a medium-sized satellite built by a company called SSTL in the UK.
What does medium size mean? Is it size of a car, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, that sort of
kind
of scale. Yeah, and it's a really innovative satellite, and it's what's called synthetic aperture radar. You don't really need to know what that means, but what you do need to know is that it lets you. You don't need optical light to see with synthetic aperture radar. So it lets you see through cloud and it lets you see in the dark. And we put 10% of time on that. And for the first time, we're going to let Australian scientists and researchers decide where that satellite will point. So we work internationally and we have input into where kind of other international satellites point. But we've never just been able to decide ourselves and say, this is what Australia wants, this is what Australia thinks is important. And this is what Australia needs in order to get this data. And it might be things like, addressing the impacts of climate change, tracking bushfires, seeing what's going on with the Great Barrier Reef.
And all those sort of important things like drought and the vegetation across the country as well,
Absolutely.
helping farmers. So there's so much that these things can do. You might be using space and you don't even realise it most of the time. That's fantastic, really interesting to hear how different agencies within Australia are kind of collaborating as well. Andrea, I really wanted to come to you because I've been itching to ask you, what is a mechatronic engineer and what do you do? What do you do in your amazing job?
So mechatronic engineering came about originally because if you wanted to set up an automation line for control systems, so if you think about, the post office or wineries or giant mining things, wastewater treatment plants, anything where there's like touchscreen control panels and then magic kind of working by itself, that would require a mechanical engineer to set it up and then an electrical engineer to wire it up and then a computer systems engineer to program it, and they just wanted one person to do everything. So it came about because of that. As a mechatronic engineer, you can specialise in control systems, automation, robotics, but it's a nice bit of everything really. So yeah, problem solving, and I've worked in quite a few industries with that, and mostly mining and space, but you can do pretty much whatever. It's what engineering's about, figuring it out and getting it done.
I've learned something tonight. Thank you very much. So you work with the International Space Station. Please tell us about that job. It's just so fascinating. And tell us first, what is the International Space Station, in case anyone doesn't know, and then what your role is.
So the International Space Station was this miraculous moment in time where all of the agencies were trying to build their own smaller space stations and realised it was kind of expensive and maybe we should talk to each other. So the engineers did start talking to each other, and there was a bit of a legacy with Apollo-Soyuz and some other collaborations that had happened. And they came up with docking adapters that they could put between the modules and an international standard design. And then they actually made this amazing intergovernmental agreement, which still stands, and it's the only thing in the world that is above politics, untouchable, and completely above politics. It's the closest thing we have to Starfleet. And it's amazing. So, in the 80s, then everything started getting built towards these adapters and putting them together like Lego in space and adding more and more bits. And so the whole thing started getting built. First module launched in 98. More and more modules started getting launched. They connected in space, no worries.
So it's just cosmic Lego.
Yeah, cosmic Lego, so good. And then the final thing, so it was finished being built in 2011, complete with terrible terrible like dial-up, speed style internet. Ask your parents about that kind of speed. But so once that was all together, so the whole thing now, it's about the size of a footy field, if the footy field was square, not an oval, end to end. And then the habitable part is about a 5-bedroom house, and about 4 bedrooms worth the science laboratories. So the Russian science lab, the US science lab, the Japanese and the European science lab. And there's 5 mission controls, not just Houston like the movies. So we have Houston, Huntsville, Munich, Moscow, Scuba. So in Japan, Russia, Europe, and America. I am technically Munich, which is actually Oberpfaffenhofen, that nobody wants to say, so Munich, about an hour west of Munich. I am actually physically in Cologne, though, other story, and most of the ISS control centres I work with are in other countries in Europe because it's the 21st century. It doesn't matter if you're in the next room or upstairs or in a different country or across the ocean. We all chat to each other super openly, and we speak in English or Russian, so we all understand each other. And if you don't understand one or the other, you just push a button and you can hear a live translation from our amazing interpreters. And we're super open comms, like genuinely. So I thought it was pretty good from the outside. It turns out it's extremely good from the inside, and we run like 200 different science experiments across the labs at any given time, with 6 astronauts total from lots of different countries. I expanded a bit, as mentioned, into crew and biomedical, and I got to go to my first rocket launch in July. So I just got back from Kazakhstan for the rocket launch of Sasha and Drew and Luca. And that was amazing. So that first rocket launch, and you get to go quite close, and you feel it, and the heat, and it was just amazing. And 42 degrees in the desert in Kazakhstan, so it felt a bit like rural Australia. I really liked it. I was the only one that liked it out of the group. So good. So we're super collaborative and genuinely in it together, and no matter what happens with our governments on Earth, we keep going because we're relying on each other to keep the astronauts alive and to keep doing awesome science and keep the equipment and everything running and keep everybody safe.
I know this is always a really hard job to answer this question, but what's your day-to-day look like? What do you actually do? What's your role, and how do you help with the science experiments? What science experiments have you been involved with on the International Space Station?
So originally when I started, I certified as an expert for just specific experiments, and I was running those and sending commands. I was remote controlling stuff on the space station, not going to lie, great. And then 5 years ago, I cross-certified for crew, so I became Eurocom, so European Capcom. It's just called a different name depending on your geography, which control centre you're in. And so I'm the person now that talks to the astronauts. So when they call down, you hear the voice that goes back up. I'll be the interface representing the astronauts in mission controls and to all the experts on the ground, and it representing all the experts on the ground back up to orbit as well. So there's set points. So I'll come on console. I will chat to my colleagues around Europe, and then check in with my counterparts around the other mission controls. So we sort of tag up and prep our day in the mornings, and then we have a 20-minute tag up with all the astronauts and all the mission controls to start our day, and then it's straight into it. So it's about 12 hours of working. They do have to exercise for 2 hours, really important for countermeasures during the day, and they get an hour break for lunch, but otherwise it's pretty chockers workday, I have to say. And so we're running these experiments, and there's certain points where they call down and we do parallel ground commanding to be more efficient. So those are the times where I'll take the calls. And then if there's any issues or questions, that's where my day is fun/interesting, because astronauts are very smart. So if they have questions, then we get our MacGyver engineering moments. So we get to, I have to listen to the astronauts in real time and figure out what's going on. And then I'm listening to the experts from the position I used to do, who know the experiments, inside out. And they're saying, what they think the solution would be. And it might be quite complex or it might be quite long. So I'll be listening to both of them at exactly the same time. And I've studied all the experiments. So I'll process the information, just put it into 1, maximum 2 sentences of more astronaut-friendly, relevant language of what they're looking at, and very quickly, give the accurate solutions up to the crew. And if we don't have one, then we say checking, or we say standby 2 or 5, because it's more important to be accurate than it is to be fast, although you do try and be quite efficient as well. So if you listen to us, you might hear the question and hear the answer. You probably won't even hear the gap, because we have to process things that fast, and those are fun times. Or we solve things more creatively if it takes a bit longer, like using shaving cream to save a super expensive camera lens from a loose screw that we had to sort of file out in pieces, and we caught all the bits with shaving cream and solved that.
Amazing. All good MacGyvering. Very, very good. That's such a cool job, isn't it? Who would like that job? I think a lot of us. Do you have to go before you talk, or is that all sorted?
There's actually a sound, and it's called the quindar. So if you push your button, you'll get a quindar sound, which is kind of a tonal beep before you go up to space. And if you've got that sound, then you know that you're on the space to ground channel and you're about to talk to space. And occasionally, if you accidentally sit on your button or something, then you hear the quindar and you very quickly release the button, and it hasn't gone to space yet, because only everything after the quindar goes to space. And then we'll go on our private loop and just pay each other out a little bit. That did you quindar?
But dialing the ISS. Oh dear, we've all done it. We've all done it. That's phenomenal. So, I wanted to come back down to ground and back to Australia and really understand, what role will we play in all of this, in the future as Australia's space industry grows, and what sort of main areas can we reasonably expect to be world leading in? I'll start with you, maybe Aude, and maybe go on to Sarah.
So couple of things. So we have these 7 priority sectors, but I think the 2 that you mentioned, and that's the 2 that everybody agrees that in space you have to be good on these 2 things. It's communication, deep space communication, laser communication, optical communication, and remote operation robotics. Because when we're gonna build the lunar gateway, when we're gonna build a base on the moon, on Mars, and beyond, it's not men and women who are gonna do that. It's gonna be robots. So in Australia, funny enough, we have a beautiful sky with no clouds most of the time. That's what you need to do optical comm. And if you build a couple of ground stations in optical comm in certain locations, you make sure that one of them will always be without clouds. So we can offer that, and we may be the first country in the world to have a network of optical comm station, and that's quite cool.
So is that real or sci-fi?
It
Is this really happening right now? This is
real.
existing
You know, in
technology?
science fiction, you have fiction, but we're really in real time now, and we're working on that.
Cool.
And that's actually led by ANU, and they are really, really doing an attraction of interests all across the world. It's not starting with NASA. And the second thing is talking about mining. So I was in Pearce visiting a control room for a very, very famous mining company. And when I entered that room, I thought I was in Houston or in one of your control rooms, because there were people controlling trains or trucks or drill. And all these people were doing that to machines that were 2,000 kilometers away in Pilbara, where the mining was. And these people were telling me, you know, I'm drilling 2,000 kilometers away. I could be drilling on the moon or Mars, no difference to me, except the latency of the return of the comm. And we realized that we have a niche skills there of working in far remote areas that are hot, dark, cold sometimes, hard accessible, and that's what space is about. And even NASA has done some study with some of these companies because they realize that we have a knowledge of this remote operation that is driven by profit of mining, but is also applicable in safety and security of what you have to do up there. So we are actively working in these 2 sectors, and we're actively talking to NASA, to ESA, to a lot of other space agencies who want to collaborate with us, because as you say, if we want to do big things, we have to collaborate. If we do it alone, it's going to take twice or 3 times more time than if we collaborate all together. And that's just 2 of the activities we are doing. So I could talk for the rest of the night to explain all the other plan, but I think this, and just one last thing about this remote operation, there is actually an institute that has been created 3 weeks ago in Perth. It's national, about robotics, and the name, so we keep that between each other, don't repeat it. It's going to be called AROSE, Australian Remote Operation in Space and on Earth. And that's an institute that's going to be driven by industry, but also universities and all the robotic centers that we have across the nation. And this is going to be a very, very busy place that's going to grow, and they're going to create a robotic center, and we're going to do absolutely great things.
So when the young people here in school do robotics or in robotics clubs, they potentially have this amazing future within the space industry. Isn't that great? Who does robotics? Anyone? Want to do a bit of robotics in your spare time? Bit of robotics in school?
I have to say, I attended a junior robotics competition while I was in Australia this trip, and I was so impressed, like super impressed with the skills that were coming out of classrooms and middle schools and primary schools that I didn't even get to see till second year uni, and just imagining what they can do after is going to be amazing. And here in Sydney, actually, there's really good space-centred robotics and other things as well. So you've even got the Australian Centre for Space Engineering. The University of Sydney also poached back from the European Space Agency, one of the best engineers originally from Australia that was over for 29 years and has come back for the space program, engineering program here as well. So there's amazing stuff that you can do locally.
Yeah, so I mean, CSRO is also engaged in robotics, and I think robotics is a really good example of an area where Australia has really great cutting-edge, world-leading kind of capabilities. But in part, I think because we haven't had a space agency, we haven't really focused on whether they'd be good in space or not, right? And so this is one of the things that the space agency is doing for us, is it's saying, you know, how about you look and see if what you are already really good at, you can apply in space. So one example that I like to give is CSRO has developed robots called Hexapods. They look like kind of robot spiders. And the biggest ones are kind of this big. And what they're for is, because they kind of scuttle on 6 legs, actually, not really like spiders, but 6 legs, they can go across terrain that's really rough. And so, like in disaster areas or where buildings have fallen down and things, they're really good, and they can go in. And then we also have another robot that can sort of sit on them and scan the area and make a map of where they are. And so you can imagine that that might be really great for on the moon, right? But we've never really thought about, would this be good in space? So that's one of the things that we're doing. We've got other little robots, little space spiders. At the moment, we use them for aircraft maintenance. So they crawl around on the outside of aircraft, and they're used to check whether the surface of the aircraft is okay. So you make them magnetic, and they could crawl around on the outside of spacecraft. So CSIRO has a new program. We're investing $16 million over 3 years to look at these things, to say, look at all what we can do and what the kind of Australian community can do, and where are the areas where we can apply those to space, and where we can then be part of these really exciting space activities that are going on.
That's very exciting. And I know that NASA's plans now to go back to the moon also include deploying certain different prototype helicopter, well, not on the moon, maybe Mars helicopters, but on the moon, different types of exploratory devices that haven't been used before. So that's a really interesting collaboration for the future. Don't think helicopters would do too well on the moon. There's no air. But yeah, it's a really exciting sort of view forward if we look forward towards larger international plans to go back to the moon, to potentially go to Mars. What of those do you think is credible? Which of those is Australia planning to support and collaborate strongly with? And which ones are most exciting?
I'm going to chip in here and say I am most looking forward to the first woman walking on the moon. So, it was. I mean, I've known this, I guess, my whole life, but it was a bit of a revelation to think back and realise that the only people who'd ever been on the moon were kind of men in the sort of late 60s and early 70s. And now that the US has said that they would like to send, people back to the moon by 2024 and the first woman on the moon, I think it's going to be incredibly inspiring for an entire new generation. I meet people all the time who are kind of, middle-aged, a bit like me, who say they were inspired into science and engineering by watching Apollo 11, by watching the first moonwalk. And I think we've got an opportunity to have that same inspiration for an entire new generation of students. And now, because of things like CubeSats, which Aude was talking about, you can make your own space hardware and launch it, not quite from your back garden, but almost.
University students are doing it, and kids are doing it in collaboration with universities. So it is almost, sort of DIY satellites, which is pretty cool. Totally agree with your comments about the first female astronaut on the moon. I'm wearing my Sally Ride t-shirt today, by the way. First American woman in space. First female cosmonaut, anyone? Tereshkova, very good.
I saw her tree in Kazakhstan, actually, in July. Yeah, every astronaut, when they launch to space, plants a tree in the cosmonaut grove at Baikonur, which is near the launch pad where Yuri Gagarin was. And so, Gagarin's is the biggest, and Tereshkova's in the first row as well. It's pretty big, and yeah.
And Tereshkova's still alive, isn't she?
Yes, she's really good. Yeah, she's around and
I wish
doing
she'd
pretty
tour
well.
more and come and see us.
Yeah, that'd be great. But going back to the moon and the exploration. So we actually have a whole subdivision at my work at the Astronaut Centre called Spaceship EAC, where we have primarily students and young researchers really working on cutting edge things. And we're building a lunar training dome between our building and the next building. We got some geologists in for a couple of years, and they developed the only certified lunar regolith simulant outside of the US. So we officially have that and have a quarry that produces it, and it's extremely close to the lunar surface. So we'll be coating the inside of the new training facility with 2/3 of lunar regolith to actually try things out. And we've got a crane, so we get gravity offset when you're testing things out in suits. We've got these young, amazing researchers and students that are looking at far out ideas as well, like how can we do energy storage with lunar regolith? How can we do 3D printing for habitats and different other things using what's on the moon, and really using the in situ resources to have a more sustainable and permanent return to the moon and the moon base, and that's what a lot of the agencies are focusing on now internationally. And Australia could definitely have a massive role in that with our expertise. We've actually had 2 Australian students that have come over to my workplace. They asked me sort of how to get across there and did the applications. You do need, for the student ones, you do need a European citizenship because of insurance reasons, but so they used their parents' nationalities and got the second passport and came over. But yeah, it's really great. We've had three Australian students now that have come and helped contribute to that.
And if I can chip in one other thing we are doing, to be able to go to space and continue doing these things, we need to be responsible in the way we're using space. And one of the sectors we're working on is called space situational awareness. I don't know if you have an idea of the number of pieces of junks that is in orbit around the Earth. That keeps me awake at night, and I know it keeps your astronauts awake at night because they have to maneuver to avoid this. So just a few numbers. We are tracking today 20,000 objects in space. We know exactly where they are, we know where they are going, and we most of the time they still have enough fuel so you can move it. That's number one. There is 600,000 pieces of space objects in space, mainly in LEO, so between 800 kilometers and 2,000 kilometers, that are under 10 centimeters. And we have 7 million of pieces of space junks, paint flake, 1 millimeter. And these paint flakes are traveling 20 kilometers an hour. When that hits something, it can make a lot of damage, like a bullet. And you have pictures that you can see from the Hubble telescope. It has been up there for quite a while. You can see pictures of impact of things that are as small as an ant, and it's a big hole in the solar panel. Now, there is a guy called Kessler. In the 60s, he made a lot of calculation, and he said, if 2 things start colliding in space, you all have watched Gravity, cool film, lots of things that are incorrect, but still good film to watch. It starts like a chain reaction, and the Kessler effects mean that the chain reaction is so big that we won't be able to launch a rocket anymore. We won't be able to access space anymore. That keeps me awake at night. It keeps a lot of people awake at night. And guess what? In Australia, we are in the southern hemisphere. We have a lot of telescopes and radars to look at all these objects, and a lot of people want to work with us to continue installing more and more ground stations to see exactly where these things are. That's number one. Number 2, the UN is doing a lot of rules that they are called long-term sustainability guidelines, where they say when you launch something, make sure that even if you're dead on arrival, and with a CubeSat, there is a lot of dead on arrival, you know where they are.
What does that mean? It's just up there, but it doesn't talk to you?
And you don't know where it doesn't talk to you, it doesn't work, there is no power, there is no telecommunication, nothing. And so you don't know where they are. So there are people developing some license plates or reflectors, so at least you know where they are, and you make sure that you can track where they are.
Anyone lost their car at Macquarie Centre?
Same thing. And then the second thing is making sure that you have a system to re-entry them in orbit, in the atmosphere, and burn them if they are in low Earth orbit. So a solar sail, you've heard that there are some people developing solar sails, so it slows down the CubeSat or the satellite, and then it finishes burning in the atmosphere, clean, good. When you are in GEO, so 36,000 kilometers up, you are asked to keep enough fuel to remove your satellite from the GEO belt and go to a graveyard orbit. And a lot of people are starting to think about it. There is no money to make in there because, who is going to pay you to clean? But I think it's a responsible civil agencies to look into this, and we are very active in that. And maybe because we are new and fresh, and a lot of people are looking at us to try to work with us to try to address this problem, because that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think an interesting question that some companies and things are starting to look at now is, can we tidy up? So can we put some kind of space net or have sort of small motors that attach to satellites that have gone dead that means we can tidy up, so that perhaps, this first kind of 50 years where we've sort of been putting things into orbit and not really thinking about what happens to them won't be a legacy that we leave for everybody.
But the issues with that is more, it's not technical, it's more financial and legal, because there's no financial incentive to do it because there's no penalties if you don't yet. And legally, the country that launched an object in space is responsible for it. So there's penalties if that falls on something on Earth, like Skylab falling on, Western Australia, and Western Australian government sent a fine to NASA that they didn't pay for quite a while, but eventually somebody paid it for littering. And there's, those sorts of consequences. But in space, you're not allowed to touch other people's stuff. So it's a bit hard to clean up if you don't know where this metallic piece has come from and which country owns it, because you're violating international law by touching their stuff. So the United Nations Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space legal subcommittee has been working in the last few years on drafting policy and a new agreement about that, so that we can start cleaning things up as well. It's a slow process because all of the countries have to agree and sign off on it.
Look, and space law is a really interesting area at the moment, right? I mean, some of the space treaties that have been around and the space law that's kind of out there is, in many cases, decades old. And really...
Name some space laws. What kind of things do these say?
Well, so like there's the Lunar Treaty, for example, which says that, that you can't own things in space, right? And so that's an interesting... if we're thinking of putting bases on the moon, and we'd like to use maybe lunar regolith to try and 3D print these bases or whatever. If you can't own things in space and you can't have your bit of the moon, how's that going to work? So I think space law has some catching up to do. And people talk about mining asteroids. Well, I mean, if you go out and I go out and land on my asteroid to mine it, and then Andrea comes along the next day and lands next to me, there's no kind of legal framework to say that anybody owns that, in fact. And a lot of countries haven't signed up to these treaties, and they don't really have much legal force either. So I think there's a lot of questions about space law.
Yeah, so there's like the Astronaut Rescue Treaty that most countries agree on, the Lunar Treaty, and the smaller ones most countries do not agree on and didn't sign. The big one that pretty much everybody signed is the Outer Space Treaty, so keeping space peaceful and keeping weapons out of space and agreeing that it's for the common good and shared. And that's a really good one. That's similar to the Antarctic Treaty that's kept space... Yeah.
So far.
Yeah, and we create Space Force in every country just now, so how is that going to work?
Yeah, I think, and that's a really interesting question, is around the kind of militarization of space. We've seen countries test shooting at their own satellites so far, but,
Creating more debris,
but, clearly testing whether it's possible to have offensive.
I think India did that recently, didn't
India did do that recently, yeah. And the US has done it.
I can't imagine the US doing
that. And there's, Space Force coming in the US. So, I mean, I think every defense force worldwide recognizes that space is a really important part of what they're doing. And we have so far avoided what you might characterize as the militarization of space. But it's not clear how long that's going to last.
It's scary stuff, but also very interesting, and interesting areas of law, I'm sure, as well, emerging in areas of law. I wanted to touch just briefly on something a little bit connected to tracking space junk, and that is radio telescopes in Australia. And Sarah, go to you. Obviously, we've worked previously together on the radio telescopes in Australia that are being developed, new and exciting international projects such as the Square Kilometre Array. Do you want to just give everyone a bit of a taster of what the Square Kilometre Array project is all about, what's actually on the ground, and what's going to happen next?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Well, look, the Square Kilometre Array is going to be Australia's first chance to host an international mega science project. It's a $1 billion project, and it will build 2 radio telescopes, one in South Africa and one in Australia. And both of these radio telescopes will be the best in the world by some margin. And there's 2 because they look at slightly different parts of the radio spectrum. The telescope in Australia will be called Square Kilometre Array Low, and it's going to be built at CSIRO's observatory in Western Australia, the Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory. And that's in the middle of the desert in Western Australia. It's around 350 kilometres from Geraldton. So that's the nearest town. And why have we gone there? Well, because it's really hard to build a radio telescope these days, because all of the electronics that you use, your car, your phone, your TV, all that all swamps the really, really tiny, tiny signals that we are trying to detect from the sky. And so we've gone to Western Australia, and in about 2 years, we'll probably start building this telescope. It's an international project. There are 12 countries involved so far. And what we are going to build is 130,000 antennas, and they look a bit like kind of giant TV antennas. They're a bit taller than me, and they will be spread across 60 kilometres of the desert in Western Australia. And using them, we're hoping to look back to not long after the Big Bang And for the very first time, to be able to see when the first stars and galaxies started to shine, what we call the cosmic dawn. And nobody has yet been able to see that. And that's the really key science goal that we'll be looking for with SKA Low in Australia. Guaranteed Nobel Prize if we find it.
Guaranteed. You hear that, kids? Get in there now. And I mean, we've got a lot on the ground there already. We've been helping to develop at least three different major international instruments that are already there at the observatory over the last few years. The Australian SK Pathfinder telescope, which is 36 giant dishes, which look at space, and then the Murchison Wide Field Array, which is kind of more like the TV antenna ones, and then the odd one that looks like a table, but has done some amazing science as well. So there's already loads of stuff out there.
Yeah, look, an ASCAP, the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder that you mentioned, these 36 dishes, each of them on them has a special new kind of radio camera. It's called a phased array feed. So radio telescopes like Parkes and things, they only look at a tiny bit of the sky at a time, and they're not really like a camera at all. But for the first time, we've now developed this new kind of camera, and we can take pictures of large chunks of the sky at a time. And because of that capability, we've been the telescope that has detected most of these fast radio bursts. So these are really, really bright radio flashes, which last only like a millisecond. And in that, there's an enormous amount of energy, and we have no idea what they are. Yeah, and the first ones were detected with the Parkes radio telescope about 10 years ago. When we designed ASCAP, we had no idea these things even existed. But we've had recently papers in Nature and in Science. And in fact, last week, we published for the first time in Science where we'd been able to, with ASCAP, work out where one of these flashes came from. One of these flashes that only occurs once and only lasts a millisecond. And we could see which galaxy it came from and which area in the galaxy. And now with other radio telescopes across the world, in Canada and in South Africa, we'll be able to track, there's loads of these going off all the time. We have no idea what they are, and we never knew they were there until we could see large chunks of the sky at a time, because they last only like that.
It's amazing. And, you know, there are just so many being found now with all different telescopes around the world, as you say. They are truly the new mysteries of our time. We've discovered already, you know, collaboratively in astronomy, things like gravitational waves, only recently, and these fast radio bursts, another new mystery that's coming along. So with every mystery solved is another one, another book opening, things we don't know, thank goodness, because that keeps us interested and engaged in discovery and in the process of discovery. And of course, you said with the Square Kilometre Array project, it's a huge international effort, and that's the key to all of this. Everything we're talking about tonight, it's all about collaboration, and we do things so much better than if we just try and do things on our own. And that's a lesson from science from decades and centuries. We do things so much better if we work together. So for Australia's space industry, I mean, who are the key collaborators, and why is it so important for everyone to work together on this endeavour?
So the way we've engaged with the industry, we're signing a couple of things. We're signing a memorandum of understanding with International Space Agency. So we signed with France, with UK, with Canada. We're about to sign with NASA, ESA, so collaborating there. And with the industry, we're signing what we call a statement of strategic intent. And that's kind of for the industry to say to the agency, these are the areas we would like to develop in Australia, in space. It's in line with your strategy. How can we help each other? And we've signed with 7 companies. We've signed with Mariota, with Nova Systems, with Gunili, with Airbus, with Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and I'm always forgetting a few. And we catch up with them every 6 months, and we try to see the progress. And so far, it's going good. And so sometimes we redesign, but we are an agency that is really industry focused. We're very small. We don't have a lot of budget, and we rely on the industry to grow themselves, and we are there to help them. And so far, we've really been able to focus on giving some directions that we've collected from the nation, so these 7 areas. The industry is agreeing that these 7 areas are great. I mean, when the agency was created, the feedback we had from the industry, from the other agency was amazing. And they were telling us, you're in a fantastic location in the world, you're a stable country. We change prime minister every 2 seconds, but we're a stable country.
But we do it nicely.
Economy is good. There is no issue, no war. Everybody wants to come here to do space. The trick is we have to make sure that if the industry grows here, is to grow in Australia, to create jobs in Australia, to pay tax in Australia, and to do it for us. And I'm maybe the strongest one, really making sure that happens. So we have an interesting conversation, and so far so good. And I think everybody is finding their way there. And that's maybe very new compared to all the agencies I've been working in the past. It's being clever and leveraging on what exists. You know, a lot of people are doing a lot of things in space. We are not there to take over. Continue what you're doing. We're here to give direction and to really join the dots. And we've joined a lot of dots so far. And we're starting to deliver a couple of key programs internationally and nationally as well. We're building a mission control in Adelaide, so Andrea can come back and work here. We're doing a robotics center in WA. We're doing some tracking facilities in Tasmania. So we are really trying to invest government money, taxpayer money in infrastructure that are going to grow the industry in Australia. And we're very
don't
careful
forget the
doing
test
that.
facilities in New South Wales at the Aerotropolis.
There is something for every state and every territory. And all that is available in our website. We have a strategy that is very, very small, easy to read, very clear, very simple. And you have to be simple with your goals, otherwise you don't achieve them. It's all available, and all the comments and all feedback is always welcome. We answer every email we receive. Even if it takes a bit of time, we will answer at some point.
So you mentioned the mission control in Adelaide, and that the Space Agency is actually just, it's been decided that the Space Agency will be based in Adelaide. And what other facilities are going to be there? Andrea, I want you to talk on this because you're a proud
I am, yes.
Adelaide
that is partially my fault. It's in
regular.
Adelaide. You're welcome. So, yeah, we secured the national agency. Aude was on the very early team before even the expert public team. There were two sort of quieter groups, and Aude and I and Jason and some others were on that. And then, for the headquarters, we wanted to have a dedicated building. So we have a very large building on North Terrace, so really downtown, in the middle of the CBD. And we've designed this large building with the different ones around it as well. So we have industry and government and the agency and academia really all under one roof, and you can have a small or a large space, and then there's shared facilities, shared lecture theatre, shared kitchen areas and rooftop and things like that. So just really designed to have everybody under one roof as a headquarters, and to have collaboration and to feed industry and academia and like government and really getting Team Australia working together in that sense. And then just adjacent to that is the Mission Control Centre and the Discovery Centre, and the Discovery Centre is kind of Questacon style, so it's a really great exploration centre that's being built for students to be able to use, and just to be able to walk in and check it out off the street and participate in hands-on activities. And then there's a bit of an observation area that'll be in the Mission Control as well, so you can look over the shoulder of the flight controllers and see what satellites they're working on any given day, or what particular missions are up on screen. And I have to say, we have that in our mission control as well, so we always have to make sure our hair's not looking too bad at the back, because you never know who's going to be looking at you from behind. And yeah, but it's really great, and it's really nice that we're a bit late to the party, but we're there, and we can do things better, because we know what works and know what doesn't work, and having the sorts of designs and collaborations and things like that, because a lot of the other agencies are only just moving to be more industry focused now, and whereas we're coming out the gate to be like, yep, that's where we're at, and encouraging local industry and government and academia and collaborations in that sense.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm conscious that we're kind of running out of time, and I just wanted to flag one area that we haven't mentioned. Well, actually two. So, and one is space medicine, right? So Australia has a really strong biomedical kind of research community. And I don't want people in the audience to think that the only way that you can get into space is by being an engineer. It's one way, but space careers span the whole gamut from, we talked about lawyers, there's marketing people, and certainly like doctors and medical scientists are one area. Finance, entrepreneurs, business people. Whatever you're interested in, you can do it in space.
So the jobs, the 20,000 jobs that the government has said will try and be, created in the next few years from the space agency, they are in so many different areas. And it isn't about being an astronaut, or it isn't necessarily about being a scientist or an engineer. There are these amazing spaces, and it isn't about working for a gigantic space agency that is one big amorphous blob. It's about entrepreneurship and people starting businesses like the rocket labs all around the country, and people testing different technologies and people creating different opportunities. And that's going to be a huge part of this, isn't it?
For the Apollo 11, there was 450,000 people working on that project, all in all. So it's a whole gamut of disciplines, absolutely.
I mean, space is changing. We've got SpaceX now servicing, the International Space Station in delivery missions, and we've got, other companies now collaborating. It was always that way, actually. NASA always branded everything in the Apollo program, but in fact, it was collaborations with industry always. But, the Australian story has kind of grown more organically through those types of industry activities. And now we have this agency to kind of coordinate all those activities to represent the nation in international discussions and to kind of look at legal frameworks across all of that. So it's not all about putting a tin can on your head and going out into space. But there's a lot of exciting stuff for young people to look forward to in the future. One last question for you all before we open it up to you, the audience, because I'd love you to be able to ask the questions of the experts that we have here tonight, and figure out what it is you're interested in, what you're wondering about. But let's talk a little bit about the future again, and where should humans be going? Because there's not only challenges facing our planet, there's challenges facing, international relations all the time. What, as a global, universal mission, should we be as humans doing? What should we be aiming towards in space? What's our vision?
So I think some people debate, should we go to the moon before going to Mars? I think going somewhere is definitely what we need to do, to demonstrate that we can, to work together, and everything we do in space is useful for the Earth as well. And that's why I like this title about the arrows thing, is space on Earth. You learn things in space that are beneficial for Earth and vice versa. So I like that. It's not because you're focusing on space and sending people on the moon and building a base on the moon that is you're only doing thing in space. You always have a return there. So going on the moon and then on Mars is definitely where we're going. On the moon, we will definitely be all alive when that happens. Mars, there is still a lot of things. Space life science is probably the issue. Radiation is killing us when we go there and we stay there. That's, for me, the biggest thing we have to cope with, finding the right material to protect yourself. And as Sarah said, the amount of doctors we have here that are really good in cancer treatment and the application of the radiotherapy tools that they've done in space is amazing. Every day I'm discovering things that have been applied in space, where the beginning was really for ground issue. So yeah, going to the moon is the next bit, and there is so many questions you can ask around this. What's the best way to do it? We say collaboration is crucial, but you also need to have a bit of competition. That's where you innovate. So where is the fine line? That's what I find interesting. Sometimes you think, Bezos and Musk are competing. What if they were joining forces? What could they achieve together? But then is it a good thing? Because then you don't have the innovation. So that's the kind of balance between the two. And the other thing that I like thinking of, sometimes we're thinking about doing bigger and bigger rocket, but some people tell me, no, we need smaller and smaller rocket, because the next thing you need to launch is cartridges. We're going to 3D print everything we need to do in orbit. I'm like, I didn't think about that. That's good. That's a good idea. So this kind of discussion late at night are the best one.
Andrea, where are we going?
Well, as I said, we're pretty focused on the moon and the lunar gateway in the international community, but I think, the sky's not the limit, so it can be whatever, and a lot of the future things will be done from in Australia, so you don't need to move overseas like all of us did work in the bigger space agencies and to work in the space industry. So Australians have already started moving home, bringing all their expertise back, and students and professionals working in Australia now and ones that haven't been born yet will be able to stay and work in the industry here and contribute to whatever our future destination is from Australia.
That's got to be good news. Sarah, where should we be going?
Look, I think I'm a big fan of going back to the moon, as I already said earlier. But I think it's really important to realise that, we use space for an enormous amount of things day to day on Earth already. And it's not just about kind of being out there and exploring. We face great environmental challenges, of which climate change is perhaps the greatest, right? And space can really help us to address that, help us to understand what's going on and how we can better address it. And so I'd like to kind of turn and look a little bit back on Earth and say, how can space help us address those challenges that we face?
Yeah, whenever we talk about climate change, it seems to be getting more and more serious, and the need is there. So let's hope that there is a lot of effort put into that area as well in the future.